It will be my pleasure to welcome today to my broadcast the host of the Capitol Hill show from the Washington Times studio, which broadcasts in more than 100 countries, Mr. Tim Constantine. Hello, Mr. Constantine. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I would like to start off by mentioning that you've been working in the media since the age of 13, which has given you a broad experience regarding the political system in the USA, as well as beyond. You're familiar with social issues and with what the world has been going through in the recent years, particularly the reset of beliefs and culture. I'm curious. In a country with a long-standing democracy such as the USA, have you ever experienced censorship during these decades?
Not censorship outright, but what I have seen in the last 10 years is editors, not at my publication, but at some publications, some of the biggest publications like the New York Times, are now telling their people what they can and cannot write. And so you might have a topic. I'll give you an example. When President Biden's son was caught having a laptop with a bunch of criminal type information on it, the media largely ignored that. And I will tell you, if that had been Donald Trump's son, the media would have focused on it 100% of the time. And in my mind, if the president's son has criminal activity, that's a story, no matter who the president is. So they are very selective. The media tends to lean to the left in the United States, most of the media. And so they pick and choose what stories they will tell. Even if it's a large news story, sometimes they will choose to ignore it. So it's not government censorship, or it's not outright censorship. There are certainly other publications like the Washington Times that will cover those things, but there are many large publications and TV networks that will simply choose not, because of political affiliation, choose not to cover certain things. And that's only in the last 10 years. Most of my life, it was not that way.
You've had the opportunity to interview President Trump for your show, as far as I know. Please let us know briefly, if it is possible, what was the subject of discussion and what has the president argued during the interview?
I've interviewed President Trump probably 4 or 5 times, and we talked about different things. I talked to him before he was president. President Obama was in some trouble, and there was some speculation as to whether or not he would be impeached, and we talked about that. Or later, then we talked about economic issues, or the border, or illegal immigrants coming into the United States illegally, as opposed to going through the proper channels. So we talked about the typical things, and I think we joked a little bit too. We had a little fun, talked about who had better hair, him or me. But he's a very smart guy, very personable guy, and always very engaging in an interview.
Now, I will be going and regarding the USA. Do you think the political polarization of the last 10 years in the US has led to the people being so divided? Why can't citizens find a common ground anymore? Why can't they unite around their similarities instead of deepening the division and hatred based on their opposing values?
It was interesting, almost 25 years ago, when 9/11 happened, when there was the attack on the United States. There was a 6-month period after that attack where the country was very united. And the United States traditionally has Christian roots and has some Christian Judeo roots. And while it's an open society, anyone of any religion can practice. If you're Muslim, if you're Buddhist, if you don't believe anything, that's all fine. But much of the history of the United States is Christian. And yet, for reasons I don't fully understand, in my lifetime, they being the media and the government, has tried to squelch discussion of religious belief to the point where, someone might be offended if you say God, or if you talk about God, or you talk about your beliefs. And so they've very much toned that down, except after 9/11. And you would see it on if you drive down the road and, sometimes a bank or a restaurant will have a sign out front where they can change the message every day. And every single one of those would say something like, God bless America. And I said this to my wife at the time, that'll only last about 6 months, and then people will start to get angry again. And for that brief moment in time, because there was a common enemy, there was unity. And I think the United States has had it so good for so long that sometimes we don't really have an enemy. I mean, we worry militarily about Russia, or there are different people, but we don't have a day-to-day enemy that we're worried about. And so I think human nature is you have to worry about something, not just you and me, but society has to have a worry. And so I think they start then picking at themselves. And that can be, unfortunate and unpleasant. I think in the last 10 years, as you said, that has come to fruition much, much more. The media has changed dramatically in the United States. The media used to, when I was growing up and first working in media, the media tried to present a balanced front. You didn't know whether the presenter leaned to the left or leaned to the right, or you didn't know. You just knew he or she was presenting you information. And now it's very clear. You have networks, CNN and MSNBC, pretty much work for the Democratic Party. I don't mean they paid by the Democratic Party, but they deliver that message over and over. Fox tends to deliver the message of the Republican Party. And so it's very hard to find a place where you just get information and then you decide for yourself. And I think that's been very divisive in America, is people naturally go and listen to those that they agree with. Most people will go, so they only tune in if they believe Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. They'll only tune into MSNBC, so they hear what they want to hear every single day. Likewise, if someone is a Trump fan, they probably only tune into Fox or Newsmax every single day. And so they don't even hear the other side. They don't want to hear the other side. But I blame the media in great part for that divisiveness. I think the media could play a wonderful role in bringing people together simply by presenting balanced information. But right now in the United States, by and large, the media is failing to do that.
Regarding what you have just said about the media, in my opinion, what has been happening for quite some time now in most countries has nothing to do with democracy, because democracy and the restriction of freedom and of expression, or the banning of the right to protest, which is also a form of expression, are opposites. So what happened? What was the moment that triggered this breakdown of democracy, and why? What was the goal?
I think the rules were applied a little differently. It's been a gradual thing. You know, the old story that you can put a frog in a boiling pot of water. If you started out at room temperature, he doesn't know. And as it heats up, he doesn't know. I think in some ways, that's the way it's been in the United States, is the media has chipped away and chipped away. I remember going to an event in 2004, covering a press event that had nothing to do with politics. It was the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. And there were several big stars, you know, Bob Seger and Jackson Browne and all these people were being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And Jackson Browne tends to be, at that time in his life, tended to be a political activist. And a reporter stood up to ask him a question. Everyone was asking him about his music and about his influences. One reporter stood up and asked politically, what are we, the reporter and Jackson Browne together, what are we going to do to beat, at that time, George Bush in the election? And I remember being stunned. This is 2004, 20 years ago, being stunned that a reporter would stand up and so clearly take sides. What do you mean we? Our job is to present information and let people decide, not to try to determine for them what to think, not to influence them. I was stunned. And that was 20 years ago. And now it happens every single day, not only at a meaningless event like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but at the White House. When you watch a reporter, I remember the CNN reporter would stand up every day if Donald Trump was giving a press conference and would argue with the president. Yes, but don't you think such and such should happen? The reporter was telling his view, and the world doesn't care what that reporter thinks. The world wants to know what Donald Trump thinks. Donald Trump is the one who's going to make the decisions. Donald Trump's the one who will either help the world or hurt the world. And so the fact this reporter would get up and take sides and try to tell what the president should think was just disgraceful, in my opinion. The reporter's job is to get up, ask a question. If you don't like the answer, that's okay. You can report on that. But you still need to hear what the president's opinion is. So in those last years, I think the Donald Trump years, the media really, really went to extremes to fight. There's a reaction here in the United States for the people that don't like Donald Trump. They call it Trump derangement syndrome, that people dislike him so much they lose rational thought. And that many of the reporters do that. They're so upset that Donald Trump is president that they'll argue with him. They'll try to distort what he says. Sometimes he will say a joke during a group event, and he'll say something to be funny, but they will report it as though he was serious, that this was really his serious comment. And so they're intentionally misleading people. So I think the Trump years changed more than anything. I do think the Obama years changed that some, because the American media loved Barack Obama, and they would do anything to try to boost him up. And when the White House would send out press releases, much of the media would simply, word for word, take that press release and share it with the public. They became the mouthpiece of the Obama administration. They didn't look at, fact check it, do homework. They didn't look at the other side of the issue and try to get about. They simply read whatever it was that the Obama people sent out word for word. And I would get these same press releases, and then I'd be watching CNN that night or CBS or NBC. And you would literally, the exact words that had been sent to me by the White House were what the reporter was saying on all those networks. So I think they lost a lot of credibility during those years. And then I think they just went crazy during the Trump years.
Regarding what you have just said, I would like to focus particularly on the situation in the USA. Donald Trump, the elected president, was a victim of the suppression of freedom of speech. Everyone watched in disbelief as the president was banned from Facebook and Twitter. Now I'd like to quote part of the speech where he mentions his current plan as the president of the USA. The American example should be followed in every country because the suppression of free speech means the death of democracy, not only in America, but everywhere. However, those who have suppressed our democracy will never take steps to dismantle it. Therefore, I believe the first step is to change the leadership, removing all those who subjected us to these abuses, and only then can we return to the path of democracy. This is exactly what the American people did. First, they changed the leadership, which by the looks of it, hopefully it is going to happen in Romania as well, because during Sunday's presidential elections, nationalism gathered 40% in Romania. George Simion, the candidate of the Our Party, along with the independent candidate Călin Georgescu, contributed to this result. Is this victory in line with the direction the USA has taken? Have the presidential elections in the USA somehow awakened Europe as well?
I think it's not just indicative of the United States or of Romania. I think it's indicative of how human beings in general feel. People like personal responsibility. They like to be able to make some decisions for themselves. They don't want the government to tell everything they're going to do, but they also appreciate the fact that there's some candor there. I think Donald Trump's victory was overwhelming. He won the Electoral College. He won the popular vote by quite a bit. He won the Senate. His party won the United States Senate. His party won the United States House of Representatives. And I think what you saw in the case of the United States was Democrats, Kamala Harris and Joe Biden's party, were trying to tell people what they believed. They weren't simply engaged. You know, if you did a poll, the number one issue was clearly the economy. People were worried about the economy and high inflation in the United States. Second issue was that open border. In Mexico, people are just coming in by the millions. No country can do that. No country can see. You can have immigrants, but you have to have rules as to how and when and how many and so on that they can. You can't just have an open door. That would be like in your neighborhood having you let people come into your home, but you decide who comes and goes. You can't have an open door that anybody can come or your home will be robbed. So it's, very, very similar on a giant scale with millions of people. But I think we've seen that in Romania. I think we see people being more conservative. I think in Italy, elsewhere, all over, we're seeing it all over Europe now, where people are tired of the left and their feel-good ideas that don't actually work. I think what's disturbing, and I'm going to go back to the same theme, but is the way the media reports this. When the Italian elections happened a couple of years ago, they compared their new leader, much of the media compared the new leader to Mussolini. Now, Mussolini killed people by the hundreds of thousands, had people killed, ran a horse. The woman in Italy is nothing like that. She's conservative. She's pro-family. She's pro-life. But in much of the media's mind, that's terribly far right, and they're comparing her to a killer. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is so far crazy. But you will see that over and over. Oh, the far right, the far right, the far right. And in the United States, sometimes they will call it the extreme right. And I think it's not extreme to be conservative. It's not extreme to let people practice whatever religious beliefs they want. It's not extreme to believe that a baby in the womb should have a chance at life. There's nothing extreme about that. It's not extreme to require people to have personal responsibility. It's not extreme to have some rules at the border as to who can come and go. And so when we look at all of these things and then listen to the media's description, you would think they're crazy. But if you look at the actual issues, they seem pretty logical. And I think that's what's happening is the voters are now tuning out the media and looking and trying to discover this information for themselves and then making a decision, and they're choosing the conservative candidates.
The same scenario happened in Romania today. And I'd like to continue the story of the elections in my country, because the exit polls were overturned by the reality of what the people truly wanted. The vote sent the candidates of the major two parties who have been in power for 35 years right back home, as the Washington Times also wrote, I think, 2 days ago. Immediately, various voices were raised. The press, the biased press, of course, which has long been loyal to these two parties, claimed that the result was unnatural and that the nationalist independent candidate, Călin Georgescu, who was supported by 2 million Romanians and ran without any paid campaign, managed to defeat the two powerful parties. The press quickly claimed, without any evidence, of course, that he was a puppet of the Russians and that Russia interfered in the elections. Also, breaking news today revealed that Romanian President Klaus Iohannis has convened the Supreme Council of National Defense to investigate potential interference by certain forces, which in other words was the social media algorithm in the election results. Many critics, questioned the decision to launch such an investigation only after the results proved to be unfavorable for the president's party, which currently ranks very low. Furthermore, they argue that any interference in national security should have been reported by the relevant institutions prior to the elections. All the national institutions led by politically appointed officials have rushed to investigate this vote under various pretexts, attempting to disrupt the democratic process. As an experienced journalist, what is your explanation for this phenomenon? Should we believe something is wrong, or is it simply the will of the people?
I obviously I don't know 72 hours after the vote what did or didn't happen there, but I will tell you in the United States, this is a very familiar story. What you're describing is very familiar. In 2016, Donald Trump surprised Hillary Clinton. Everybody, the media had all predicted, the polls had all predicted Hillary Clinton was going to win. I have a photograph of Hillary Clinton signing, autographing a Newsweek magazine that said Madam President, that they had printed ahead of time, assuming she was going to win. And she was signing autographs on that. And of course, she didn't win. But the immediate response was, oh, Donald Trump is affiliated with the Russians. Right. Sounds so familiar. They interfered in the election. There was collusion. Now, I'm going to tell you a couple of facts that have come out and that the media in the United States has largely ignored. In the United States, there was a 2-year investigation, cost about $30 million, into whether or not there was any collusion. And this was put together by a team that included 11 Democrat, Hillary Clinton's party, Democrat attorneys. They found there was nothing to it whatsoever. There was no connection at all. However, what they did find was Hillary Clinton's campaign and the Democratic Party had fabricated a file that had connections, false, artificial, fictional connections of Donald Trump to the Russians. They had given that file to the FBI. They also gave that file to John McCain, who was a Republican, but John McCain hated Donald Trump. So John McCain then took it, said, oh my gosh, this is terrible, and took it to the FBI. So the FBI said, oh, we've got this from 2 sources. And the truth was it was the same file from one source, and that source was Hillary Clinton and her party. And so 2 years and all that time and money was wasted accusing Donald Trump of being affiliated with the Russians. And even Democrat appointees couldn't find that he had done anything. It was all fabricated. So I think for me, in the American case, the most disturbing part of that was the then director of the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, the spy agency of the United States, went while Barack Obama was still president, because our elections are in November, but the new president doesn't get sworn in until January 20th. So there's a 3-month window there. And during that window is when the Russia story came out. Our director of the CIA went and sat with the then President Obama and said, don't worry about this. We know this file is fabricated, but let's let it play out politically. Let's let it play out. But you don't have anything to worry about. The country is not in danger. The Russians aren't really here. And then John Brennan, that CIA director, spent the next 2 years as a paid consultant on CNN, literally every single day talking about, boy, this doesn't look good for Trump. I'm privy to a lot of information. Maybe he really is connected to the Russians, even though he had already told President Obama he knew that wasn't the case. He lied to the American public every single day for 2 years. And when they were done, when the report came out and said there's no connection, his quote, and I'm not making this up, he said, oops, I guess I was wrong. End of quote. And so you have people that are high up that are intentionally trying to mislead the public, and that was the United States of America. So could someone in Romania be making these accusations for political purposes? Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because, in our case, nobody disputed that he has 2 million votes. What they challenged was the idea that TikTok influenced the people. And now I'm sitting here and I'm wondering, do we no longer have the right to an opinion? I have my own desires and thoughts, yet it feels like they're trying to dictate whether my thoughts are right or wrong.
They do it in a very clever and discreet way sometimes. I was on Turkish television, TRT, on election night here in the United States. And the host, was a woman, and it became clear that Donald Trump was going to win. And at that point, he was up by about 5 million votes. He was ahead by about 5 million votes. So it was clear he was going to win. And she said to me, her question was, why do you think Americans went ahead and held their nose and voted for Donald Trump? And I said to her, that's an absurd question. She was very angry at me, by the way, because I called her on it on live television, but I said, that's an absurd question. What makes you think they held their nose? There are tens of millions. Donald Trump got 76 million votes. There are tens of millions of people that like Donald Trump. There are tens of millions of people that like his agenda, and they voted for him. That doesn't mean they held their nose. They didn't do it in disgust or disgrace. They want him to be president. You may not want him, you, the host of the show, may not want him to be president, but clearly the American public does. And oh, she didn't like that. But the media does that a lot. They will frame the question in such a way that it leads you off in a direction. Oh, why did the American people vote for a guy they didn't like? And I thought, no, there are some people that don't like him, but clearly there's 76 million people that do like him.
In our country, part of the politically biased media claims that the Romanian independent candidate for the presidential elections, Mr. Georgescu, has a pro-Russian orientation, as I've already said. However, the media doesn't really accentuate the fact that the independent candidate who won the majority of votes also wrote the preface to the book The Real Anthony Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health, which was written by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., which you have also interviewed not long ago, and who is part of the Trump administration. So I'm wondering, could such a person ever be anti-NATO or a communist?
I don't think a Kennedy would be pro-Russia or you're absolutely correct. That's a great point. Yeah, it's disturbing that the media try, we talk about the old days when they would cut meat and the butcher would put his thumb on the scale trying to make it seem like it was heavier than it really was. And I charge you more money. And I feel like the media is constantly trying to put its thumb on the scale and tell you and your voters what you should think, what you must think, instead of allowing you to make that decision for yourself. And I think that's a very dangerous thing when a small group of people start trying to dictate, who are not elected or selected by anyone. They're in their television or they're in print, and they're trying to tell everyone else what they should do. That's a dangerous situation. I will say one thing, and that is, you asked earlier, when did it change? I think some of it changed at the time that news, when I was growing up, there was a newspaper, every day. There was no internet. And so every day you would get a printed newspaper and it would be delivered to your door and you would have that. Or you would watch the television at night at 6:30 p.m. You'd watch the daily news. And as the internet grew and became more and more influential, and then everyone went there for its stories, the ability for publications in the United States, those are for-profit publications, whether it's the New York Times or the Boston Globe or anyone else, they would sell advertising, they would try to make money off their product. And so in the old days, they wanted to be as accurate, but they also wanted to be as diverse in their thought as possible. So they would sell their newspaper to the most people and then be able to sell advertising to the everyone who wanted to reach, whether that's selling electronics or tires or anything else, wanted to reach the largest audience. On the internet, people don't go to one single newspaper a lot of times. They will pick this story and pick that story, and they will read different things from different sources, which is great, but it's not so good for the publication. It's harder for a newspaper to make money. And so they have smaller staff and they have fewer editors, and much of your staff has less experience. That doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. You're young. I was very young when I started. You can be a good quality journalist at any age, but it's important to have some experience somewhere in your organization, particularly editors, just to keep an eye on things. And a lot of these publications don't anymore because they're trying to save money. So there is no editor, or so you have very few people with experience, very few people that are checking their own team's work. And so I think a lot of things get out there just the way you were describing, where they're telling you what you should think instead of sharing with you what's happening, instead of simply sharing news. I think one of President Trump's greatest assets, greatest strengths when he was president before, and again in his upcoming term, is that he is unpredictable. I did an interview with Senator Lindsey Graham, who has been a United States Senator for a long, long time, is close friends with Trump, but also is very active in the international world, in the international community as a member of the U.S. Senate. And he said to me, he looked me in the eye and said, Tim, people don't know what he's going to do. People fear Donald Trump. Some people who would be bad actors, of Vladimir Putin or others who might be dangerous, fear Donald Trump because they don't know what he'll do. And they're afraid that he will do something crazy or something reactionary if they step out of line. And so if you look at the 4 years that Donald Trump was president, we didn't have Russia and Ukraine. We didn't have the Gaza situation. We didn't have a lot of those things because some of the bad actors stayed in line. They were afraid of what Donald Trump would do. And I think you'll see that again this time around. I hope that we will have some good activity in the Middle East, that we'll see that slow down. Donald Trump knows Bibi Netanyahu very well and can speak to him. And Netanyahu does not listen to a lot of people, but he does listen to Donald Trump. So I think we have an opportunity there. I'm not sure that everything will go, but I think we have an opportunity that doesn't exist now. Joe Biden has no relationships in the Middle East with the Arab community or with the Jewish community. He does not get along over there. So Donald Trump being there will change. I think Trump's approach of being aggressive and unpredictable will help the situation in Ukraine. I think Vladimir Putin will realize there's an opportunity here. While Trump wants peace, and he's made no bones about that, if you refuse him, there will be a price to pay for that. He's made clear. So I think it's going to be an interesting first few months of his administration, and I hope that that will balance things back out. Most importantly, bring about peace, but balance things back out in Eastern Europe and elsewhere.
Regarding the young people in Europe and especially in Romania, what do you think? Why do you think that Trump has become a figure of interest among Romanian nationalists and particularly the youth? Because there's this new wave in Romania of young people, which was shocking for me. They are standing for the nationalist wave and for President Trump.
I think he is inspirational to young people in that he creates hope. He looks at what can be, not just what is. He doesn't, and he will point out when there's a problem. He will point out there's a problem at the border. He will point out there's a problem in Ukraine, but he also then takes it to the next step. How can we solve that problem? It's very easy to point out a problem. Coming up with an answer is more challenging, and he's pretty good about that. He creates hope. And I think hope is the magic to life at any age, but especially when you're young. You want to look forward and think, wait, I can have a better tomorrow. I want to have a family. I want to have kids. Maybe you have kids and you think, I want a better life for them. I don't want them to grow up in a tough world. So I think he creates hope moving forward in a world that badly needs it.
The people in Romania want to know, is there any evidence that Trump's leadership has influenced the rhetoric or behavior of political leaders in Eastern Europe?
I think human nature is, going back to my earlier question, I think human nature is conservative. Now, I'm conservative, so maybe I just believe that, but I think human nature is people want to take responsibility for themselves, by and large. People expect others to take responsibility for themselves. People want to create a better life for themselves, but they want to be free to do that. They don't want the government constraining what they can and can't do, what they can and can't think, what they can and can't say. Never in the history of the world has society improved when the government tells people what they can and can't say or what they can and can't do. There is no example, not 100 years ago, not 1,000 years ago, not 2,000 years ago, that if government starts restricting people, that life gets better. It doesn't work. And so I think human nature is we want to be able to make some of those decisions for ourselves and create a better life. And so I think that's what they see is innately, just naturally in their mind. Trump's method of doing that is great, but I think beyond Donald Trump, what you see in Romania, what you see in many parts of the world is People just want the opportunity to make a better life for themselves.
Before ending, I'd like to ask everybody that is watching right now, should we focus on external factors or the state of our own country, each of our own countries? Should we address the dysfunctional healthcare system, the broken educational system, or maybe the corrupt justice system? Should we focus on the fact that so many Romanians are leaving the country because these two ruling parties has given themselves and their people an income of thousands of euros while giving nothing to the people? For 35 years, these parties have divided society into two classes in Romania: the privileged, their people, and on the other hand, the people. To counter the 40% of votes won by Călin Georgescu and George Simion, the ruling parties are uniting once again, despite having no ideological connection. Left-wing parties are teaming up with the right-wing ones to perform a large anti-nationalist bloc. They claim that they do it for stability, but does uniting opposing programs truly mean stability? Could it be the fact that these artificial alliances are being formed simply to preserve the power they've held for 35 years? These parties have been benefiting from the country's wealth for decades. Therefore, they can't imagine giving it up now. In America, the majority of people voted for freedom this year. Hopefully, your choice will awaken the rest of us as well. Mr. Constantine, thank you so much for your time. It was a pleasure.
Maria, thank you. I appreciate it.